Schmelter, and I'm glad that you could join us today. Today's Bridges interview is going to be by way of a video conference interview, and we're going to talk about how one boy's miraculous journey through autism is changing the world. And I want to welcome you by way of video conference today.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on the program, Craig and Craig Johnson. And the name of your book is Champion, and this book is really the story of your family and of your son, Connor. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, with Connor, it really started out, we had two typical kids. We had a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. We were actually done having children. And I went to have the operation to stop having children on Thursday. And then my wife came in crying on the following Saturday, and she said, "You won't believe this, but I'm pregnant." And then I started crying. It got worse from there. But so that's really where it started. And after we got through with the shock, we were just so excited to have, a new baby boy, and started to go on that journey. And about a year and a half into it, we were moving from California to Texas. And when about 6 months into us being in Texas, we started noticing changes with Connor. And that's really where our story began.
Yeah. Tell me, because one of the things, and I love the book, and the book is Champion. It's written by Craig Johnson, and he's on staff at Pastor Joel Osteen's church. You say that it's hard to really explain to people what it's like to interact and know your child one way for that child's life, and then all of a sudden, their behavior, they're different. What did those changes look like, and what was that like for you and for your wife?
Yeah, probably the best way I can describe it, it was like your child's one way, and then within a week and a half, he's totally different. The best way I could describe it is like a bad car wreck, and you're trying to navigate it. So where at one time Connor would play with friends, now he would go sit by himself and stare off the wall. Where he would give us a hug and a kiss, now he showed no emotion whatsoever and wouldn't even look us in the eye and look away. Where he would say, "I love you, Mommy and Daddy," he stopped talking altogether. And to say it changes your world is probably an understatement. You begin to realize you're about to go on a new normal. Mm-hmm. And you don't know what that looks like, especially when it hits you as a special needs parent. But it's going to be a journey. It's going to be an unforgettable journey, and it really, really depends on how you respond to it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, Craig, as I've read through your book, Champion, and thank you so much for writing it, because I know that so many people have special needs children, and even those that don't. We all know people that do, and it's hard to sometimes know what other people go through and what their needs are. And so you're a man of faith. I mean, you're a pastor on the staff of a church, and you're seeing these changes in your son. And I know that you're a person of faith, as I am, and yet it's hurtful. It had to be scary. How did you get the diagnosis of autism?
Yeah, well, I'll never forget it. Actually, we knew something was wrong, and when I got the diagnosis, my wife actually called me in the car. I was driving home from work, and she called me in the car, and she said, "Craig, we just got the diagnosis. Connor's on the middle of the spectrum." And this is really where the enemy comes in. He starts to fill your mind with doubts and fears, and I could just hear the enemy right then just say, "Your child is not going to be like your other kids. Your child's going to be deficient. He's never going to do anything. He's going to be forgotten." And I remember during that time, it was really in the faith-filled environment that I was in, that instead of listening to those voices, I remember hitting the gas in my car and driving up to my house and running upstairs to my 2.5-year-old son and just holding him in my arms. I looked at him and I said, "You are a victor, you're not a victim." I said, "You can do all things through Christ. You're more than a conqueror." And it's at those times when fear starts to come in, you've got to speak words of faith. You've got to combat it at the moment, because if it sets in any person that's facing a major challenge in their life, if it sinks in, it can begin to work on you. And I even say this, a lot of times, many times we want grace for 2 weeks from now, or a couple months from now, or years from now. But the truth is, God only gives you grace for a day because He needs you to be dependent upon Him. And so we have to take every day and find that grace, and we've got to hold on to it and make the most of it.
Yeah. And I appreciate, because you really share, Craig, in your book, very transparently, honesty, and you used a lot of humor in your home to deal with, because we're talking about hard stuff. I mean, when your child doesn't make eye contact with you, and they had previously, I think that would be especially hard, and not playing with other children, and just the thoughts that anybody would have. My kid is not going to be okay in life. I have these other two healthy kids. And you're saying you responded to all of that by faith, but that doesn't mean that that faith response necessarily came naturally or easy to you. What you're saying is you really had to fight for that.
Yeah, you have to fight for it every day. It'll be like a roller coaster. When you're holding on to every day, you've got to let go of that. If you had a bad day, you've got to let go of that day, and you can't hold on to it. And then you've got to embrace the day and the grace that God's given you, and then you got to trust God, for the future. Because for families like mine, you can't think well into the future because it will really mess with your head. The challenges, how overwhelming it might be as they grow older.
Mm-hmm.
Those things can be overwhelming. Plus, what we were dealing with was we were really dealing with a lot of problems that a lot of families with autism were dealing with. It wasn't just how Connor was, but it was even the reactions that he was having, where he was having these terrible meltdowns, and it's really trying to work through that day and find through that day. But it can't be you fighting, because you'll never win that battle. God has to fight for you, and He has to come in there for you. And I always say it like this, really, when I see families move from victim to victor, it's when they start helping someone else, even in the midst of their storm. Yeah. And we had to start not just looking at our situation. We had to let God fight that battle, but we also had to begin to look to help someone else, even in our situation. It gave us a different perspective on what we were going through.
Yeah, and you were going through a lot, but what you're saying is you begin to open your eyes and your heart to other people, to other families with special needs, so that you just weren't focused on your family and on Connor. We're taking a look today in the book Champion, and it's authored by Craig Johnson, and it's the story of his son and his miraculous journey, and how through his son's autism the world is really changing. And really, Craig, you're talking about sometimes the daily fight of a day where your son is having meltdowns, and you're saying, well, you can't look 20 years out, you just deal with that day. And yet you've written this book Champion, and you've done some really things that your church and other churches are following suit to help being able to reach out to other families with special needs kids. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it really spurned off one of our lowest moments. My wife took my son to the grocery store, and in the grocery store, he wanted something. She didn't understand what he wanted. He had this terrible meltdown. And of course, this is the fear of every parent when they go to the grocery store. He's having a meltdown. They're doing everything she's doing everything she can do. And people are looking at your son, unfortunately, it's just human nature, like, what's the matter with him? And then they're looking at the parent, why aren't you doing something? And my wife was just trying to get him out of the grocery store and trying to calm him down. And I remember her coming home that day, and she said, Craig, I'm not sure if I can take it anymore. Oh. And I remember at that moment, my wife's my hero. So she's one of the strongest people that I know. So I know she was just saying it off of emotion.
Right.
But it really hit me. And so I remember driving to work that day, and I just asked God why. Not why I had my son, but why is he struggling so much? And I'll never forget what God spoke to me. And he just said this. He said, Craig, your child is not a burden. Your child is a gift. And I said, God, I know what you mean. We love our child. And he goes, no, you're not hearing me. Your child's not a burden. Your child's a gift. And I said, God, what do you mean? And he said, Craig, I'm going to use your son to reach millions of people. And I've got to be honest with you, at that time, even as a man of faith, I couldn't see it. And I literally picked up a bottle of water out of the cup holder and I held it up. I said, God, my son came to me and asked for a drink of water. How's he going to reach millions of people? I'll never forget what God spoke to me. And it was just 4 words that he'll speak to you whenever you're in the desert. And whenever you need a cool cup of water, he just said, do you trust me? And I remember during that time, I didn't have elaborate prayers. All I could say was, you know, God, there is no cure for autism unless you heal my son, but I trust you. And I thought things were going to get better, and they actually got worse, you know. And this is the time of trusting. And here's one thing I want to say to your viewers. You know, when you're going through that time of trusting God, you know, and you're going through those big challenges, you don't have to pray elaborate prayers. I remember during those times, I would just say, I trust you, or I'd speak the name of Jesus. And I found out with God that was enough.
Yes.
But about 3 months later, my wife comes calling from upstairs, and she said, Craig, get up here. And I thought something was the matter, so I run upstairs, and she's crying. She said, Craig, I was putting Karn to bed. I was reading him a couple of books. And she said, I began to pray over him. All of a sudden, he began to speak. And he began to say one word after another word, one sentence after another sentence. And you got to realize I haven't heard my son put together more than 3 words in 3 years. And I said, what do you mean he began to speak? And she said, Craig, he began to speak. And so tears started to roll down my cheeks. And I said, what did he say? She walked me over to his bed, and she said, Connor, say it for Mommy, Daddy. Say it again. And my little 5-year-old boy looked up at us, and all of a sudden he began to speak, and he said, this is my Bible. I am what it says I am. I have what it says I have. I can do what it says I can do. Today I'll be taught the word of God. I boldly confess. My mind is alert. My heart is receptive. I will never be the same. He begins to speak this entire spiritual declaration, and that became his first words. And that just shows you when you're in the desert, if you'll trust God, he'll give you the rain that you need.
Yeah. That I just can't even imagine as a parent, and just the blessing, the miracle, Craig, that it was 88 words, a declaration of faith from a boy who had been silent for years. And, you know, I think you're right. Sometimes when we come to that place of we're at the bottom, we think it can't get worse, it gets worse.
Yeah.
But as you said, rain and miracles do happen, and this was one of Connor's miracles.
Yeah, it was huge. And I remember speaking at our church at Lakewood about 3 weeks later, and I show a video, and our church are criers, you know. We emotionally connect, and they're watching this video of Connor saying his first words. And I even remember Pastor Joel just weeping, and he comes up to me afterwards, and he says, Craig, he said, can I speak about this miracle that took place with Connor? And I said, absolutely. And so about 40 million people watch through the podcast or through the television show every month. And when he spoke about Connor and that miracle went around the world. And people from around the world started sending us emails and started reaching out to us. And I remember during that time, just God doing that miracle of what he said he'd do in the car, where millions of people would listen and see his miracle.
That's amazing. We've got to take a break. We want you to stay with us. When we come back, we're going to hear more about Connor's miraculous journey as we take a look into this book entitled Champion, written by Craig Johnson. We'll be right back.
You can purchase a copy of today's show for $15. Call us at 615-754-0039 or send a check to the address on the screen. Please mention the program number on the screen.
For more information on a guest, visit our website, ctntv.org. Prayer changes things. If you need prayer, write to the address on the screen. Call 615-754-0039 or email prayer@ctntv.org.
If you're just joining us today on Bridges, we're taking a look into a book called Champion, written by Craig Johnson, about his son who was diagnosed with autism. We were just talking about a miracle that God did in Connor's life that millions of people were able to hear. And so, Craig, you know, we were talking about your son and how he hadn't spoken many words. And then some years went by, and the first thing that he said was Pastor Joel Osteen's 88-word declaration about the Bible.
Yeah, yeah, it was incredible. And, you know, we didn't know it, but Connors was bringing the DVDs home that we'd bring of the messages, and he was putting them in his DVD player. And it didn't matter if the message changed, that declaration was at the front of it, and it just went over and over in his head. But make no mistake, it was a miracle, because a child with autism can learn anything. The fact that he spoke a spiritual declaration, that truly was a miracle in it all.
Yeah, and it really was an encouragement to you and your wife and Pastor Joel and everybody that saw it. And some things really at that time, you know, because God had spoken to you that he would work through your son's life and millions of people would hear about it. And so that was one demonstration. And then you started these champion clubs, and I'd love for us to know more about that.
Yeah, so I had a second intimate conversation with God. I was walking through our church, and all of a sudden we were near the kids area, and God just stopped me, and he said, Craig, look at what you're doing for typical kids. He says, it looks like Disneyland. He said, but look at what you're doing for special needs kids. And at the time, we weren't doing very much, and we were just walking on this journey. He said, Craig, those kids deserve the very best, just like every other child.
Amen.
And he said, when you look in these kids' eyes, he said, who you're looking at is you're looking at me. Because when you do it in the least of these, you do it unto me. He said, favor will follow you and your church when you reach out to these kids, teens, and adults, because I'm not going to let the church and I'm not going to let society forget them anymore. So at the time, you know, honestly, we didn't know what to do, but I knew how to put together a task force. And there were two things I wanted to make sure of. One, the program had to be so good that we would never turn away a child, teen, or adult, no matter how difficult their need was. Then secondly, we had to have programs that support the parents, because they're the ones carrying the refrigerator on their back. They're the ones walking through it. And so I just began to reach out to the University of Texas Medical Center, where they're doing incredible research. And I asked a couple doctors to be a part of the task force. I went to two of the top educational schools and asked some of the directors to be a part of the task force. And I found the most important, parents with special needs kids. And for an entire year, we worked on what would become the Champions Club. We didn't know it would be innovative at the time. We were just trying to meet the need. But the Champions Club is a holistic approach. So it's mind, body, soul, and spirit. So that's why there's 4 stations in a Champions Club. There's a physical therapy station, there's a sensory station, there's an educational station, and there's a spirit station. And so the kids, teens, and adults, they rotate in between these 4 stations. And they're developed just like every other child, teen, or adult that comes to church. It gives the parents a chance to, just be able to come to church and hear a message and be a part. And the kids are actually being developed. And about 2 years ago, Dr. Sandy Robinson and I wrote the first Christian curriculum in history for special needs.
Wow.
So God's using it, you know, and it's incredible. Now there are 70 Champions Clubs around the world, one on every continent.
Did you say 70?
Yes.
70 Champions Clubs. That's amazing. And how God all worked it, you know, through your life, through Connor, and what was such a hard thing and an unexpected thing, and yet God is using it to affect really the world. We're taking a look today at a book that's called Champion. It's written by Craig Johnson, and it's all about his son's journey with autism and how God is working through that to really change the world. And you know, you mentioned the Champions Club, and now there are 70 of them. You said one on every continent. And as I read your book, one of the comments that you made was about how this even gives parents a chance to hear the message. Because many parents of special needs children just don't ever get that kind of break. And you mentioned a man at your church, I think he was just able to go to the drama club or be in a church play. Tell us about how he thanked you for your work and what it meant to him and his family.
Yeah, I just get a call, and I hear that someone wants to meet me before the service, and I start walking down the hallway, and this guy is like 6'6", 290 pounds. I'm going, what in the world did I do wrong? What does this guy want? And he looked like a football player, and
Yeah.
he was formerly. And as I walked closer to him, it was amazing. All of a sudden, this big guy, just crocodile tears start rolling down his cheeks. And he said, "Are you Pastor Craig?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, he reached out his hand. He said, "I want to thank you." And I said, "For what?" And he said, "Tonight I'm volunteering for the first time in 6 years." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well," he said, our son was in our family's church, and generations of our family had went there, but our son is severely autistic, and they told him he couldn't come anymore. And I told them, if my son can't come, right, then we're not going to come. Mm-hmm. And this is like a lot of families right now that they deal with this within the church. And he said, so we stopped going to church for 6 years. He said, but then I heard about the Champions Club, where you never turn any child or teen or adult away, no matter how severe they are. And he said, so we brought our son to the Champions Club, and he was loved and accepted. And he said, tonight, I just want to thank you, because we're back in church, and we're coming to church for the first time, and I'm actually volunteering tonight in the drama production. And he just gave me this big hug. And I realized that day, just this ministry isn't just another ministry. It's transformational, yes, for these families. And it changes their whole dynamic. And yeah, so it's huge.
Yeah. And I think, Craig, about the heart of God, because we're all made in God's image, and all children, all people are his creation, and how his heart must hurt to see any child turned away from church or unwelcome. And I would say the same thing if that was me. I mean, if my kid can't come here, then we're not coming. And yeah, for somebody to be out of church for 6 years and to have that opportunity as a result of Champions Club, because you trusted God, as scary as it was, when you got the diagnosis that no parent wants.
Yeah, we look at brokenness as something that needs to be fixed, but God looks at brokenness as someone ready to be used. Mm-hmm. And I believe this. Brokenness has a perfume that pride can never produce. Yeah. And God wants to use these kids and teens. We're not just about care with Champions Club. We're about pointing these kids to their destiny, yeah, and helping them navigate how to get there. That right, these families need hope that their kids can be used. And that's really where Connor's at, where God's using him. I mean, Connor's been now written about in 6 different books. God's used him through Champions Clubs. Millions of people have heard his testimony. They're about to do a movie on this book. And, it's something that people need to grab a hold of, that God's just not just wanting them to be cared for, which that's important.
Right.
But God's wanting to use these kids. And, if I could tell you this really quick, we did the other day a play here at Lakewood, Beauty and the Beast, live, a Broadway production of it. And we did it starring special needs, kids, teens, and adults. And it wasn't just, oh, that's a cute play. So it was a Broadway production. The local theater helped us with the costumes, everything. And these kids, teens, and adults nailed it. And I remember the drama director saying to us early on, Pastor Craig, I'm not sure if they're going to get these lines down. This is going to be really tough. Yeah, I'm not sure if they can do it. And I said, just give them a chance.
Yes.
And I'll never forget one guy, Lucas. Lucas he would go out and he would do his lines. He'd come backstage, put his headphones on, and he'd walk back and forth and everything. Then right when his lines were back on, he'd take off his headphones and go back out there. They not only nailed it, but 10,000 people came to this production. And they said it was amazing. Yes. I mean, like, good. It was awesome production. And it was the most moving thing that they'd ever seen. And what I would say to people and churches and organizations, don't underestimate what God's created.
Yes.
Because everything that comes out of his hands are beautiful.
Amen.
And if we'll give it that navigation to help them be everything God's created them to be, they can change the world.
Yeah, that is absolutely awesome. We're talking again out of a book, Champion, authored by Craig Johnson, and he wrote the story of his family and his son when he got this diagnosis of autism, and how God is working in and through that. And Craig, we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I'm sorry about that because I'm enjoying this conversation. You talked about Champions Club and transformation, and one of the areas that gets transformed are people's marriages. You talk about how in the book, parents of special needs children, sometimes their marriage suffers, but you say it doesn't have to. And you give tips and helps on how couples can pull together.
Yeah, it's really crucial. Marriages with special needs parents are breaking apart at a high rate. And you understand the pressure and all the things that they're dealing with. The biggest thing that the enemy will do is they'll try to create a wedge, because you're already dealing with challenges with your son. So you're going to deal with medical, financial, all those different types of things. Couple key things. One, learn to pray together. This is very important. And don't wait till later on in the day. When the enemy hits you with thoughts, you're overwhelmed, pray right then.
Yes.
That was a key for us, just to attack it. It's amazing how a peace would come over us. Then the second thing is, keep life as normal as you possibly can. You've got to do things. You've got to go out on a date every once in a while. You've got to, and it's going to be hard. You're going to have to press through. You're going to have to get somebody to help you. But try to keep things as normal as you can. Go on vacations with your family. And the third thing is, find a place where you can find a community. So many of our families are shut in, and they're struggling. And church isn't on TV. It's good for a while, but you need a community to come around you.
We all need a community of faith. I want to thank you so much for joining us on Bridges by Video Conference. It's been wonderful to meet you and talk with you. Thank you.
It's an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. I want you all to go out and to get this book. It's called Champion. It's written by Craig Johnson. And this story is an inspirational story that I think will encourage all of us to love and accept all people. We got to go, but we say goodbye and God bless you. The blood of Christ is the only cure. It gets down to the root of every single thing that ails us. There's not an addiction, there's not a generational curse, there's not any root of sin. There's nothing that the blood of Jesus cannot cleanse.
Visit monicaschmelter.com to schedule Monica to speak at your event.
When I truly turned my heart to the Lord, He took every sin I ever did away from me.
Amen.
He took all the bad things I did. He took away everything that I felt like I felt short.
God is so good. God healed me, and doctors told me that disease was something that could never be cured. It can be controlled.
The start is what stops most people. You know, it's no good to have a big dream if you're not putting yourself in motion to go after that.
Is that butterfly, that excitement of the new relationship, once that goes away, what you're left with, is that something that you're okay with?
And once they start buying into the truth about themselves, then they can begin to change, that process of change in their life.
Join the Bridges community on Facebook. Visit Facebook and search for Bridges with Monica. We would love to connect with you.